Rachel knocked on the door of a luxury ski mansion, her fingers trembling from the cold. Her car had just died on the snowy mountain road outside, and she didn't know what else to do. When the door opened, she flinched slightly. Not from the wind, but from the man standing in front of her. He was tall, clean-shaven, dressed like wealth had never been a question. Dark cashmere, perfect posture, expression unreadable. His eyes scanned her quickly. Damp jeans, worn boots, a coat clearly meant for city errands, not blizzards. "I'm sorry," Rachel said, her voice shaky. "My car broke down just outside. I don't have a signal. I didn't know where else to go." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he stepped aside. She stepped into warmth. The floor was heated. The silence inside was thicker than the wind outside. She stood stiffly in the entrance, not sure if she was supposed to move further in. Her clothes were soaked, her cheeks numb, her pride somewhere buried under the snow. "Take off your coat," he said, still watching her. "You're drenched." Rachel hesitated, then slowly peeled it off. Steam rose from her shoulders as the air hit her wet clothes. "I'm Rachel," she added, trying to fill the silence. "Ethan," he replied. He disappeared into a hallway, and she used the moment to take it in. Vaulted ceilings, stone walls, glass windows overlooking a pine-covered slope. A fireplace glowed in the center of the room, but it felt more like a museum than a home. Everything here was deliberate. Nothing here was hers. A few minutes later, Ethan returned with a thick towel and a steaming mug. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking both. He nodded. "Sit. Warm up." She sat on the edge of a leather chair near the fire, trying not to sink into it. She wrapped the towel around her shoulders and brought the mug to her lips. Tea. Strong. Herbal. Unfamiliar. But warm. He sat across from her, silent. Rachel didn't want to explain, but she also didn't want him to assume. "I was supposed to take the highway," she started. "GPS rerouted me. I was headed to an interview in Silver Pine. My car's old. I knew I was pushing it." He said nothing. "I didn't mean to end up here," she added. "I just didn't know what else to do." Ethan studied her for a moment, then spoke. "You're lucky. Storm like this? Most people would have frozen out there." "I was starting to think I might," she said with a tired smile. "This place, it looked like a resort. I wasn't sure anyone even lived here." "I come up alone," he said. "Helps me think." Rachel nodded. "Must be nice, having somewhere to escape to." He didn't respond. The silence returned, but something about it was different now. Not cold, not quite warm either, just waiting. Then finally, Ethan stood. "You can stay tonight. Guest room's down the hall. We'll figure out the car in the morning." Rachel blinked. "That's really generous of you," he shrugged. "You don't have a lot of options." She didn't argue. As he walked away, Rachel sank deeper into the chair, towel pulled tight, tea still warming her hands. Her life had been a long series of doors that never opened. This one had. And she wasn't sure what that meant yet. Rachel woke to the scent of cedar and something faintly citrusy, like the air itself had been cleaned. The blanket he'd left folded at the foot of the guest bed was now wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her damp clothes from the night before were draped neatly over a wooden chair by the window, dry now, still humble against the mountain lodge elegance around her. She stepped out of the guest room and into the hallway, moving carefully as if afraid to leave footprints. The house was impossibly quiet, not the kind of silence that invited rest, but the kind that warned you not to touch anything. The walls were lined with matte black frames and abstract art. Cold tones, sharp edges. Every surface looked untouched, as if the house had been decorated for a magazine shoot and then abandoned. Even the air felt curated. She found her way back to the living room where Ethan was already up, standing by the stove in a sleek black kitchen that looked more like a showroom than something meant for meals. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Morning," she said softly. He handed her a new mug of tea without a word. Rachel took it, warming her hands before taking a sip. Same herbal blend, still unfamiliar. "This place is—" She looked around, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding ungrateful. Incredible. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Cold? She blinked, caught. I didn't mean it like that. He leaned against the counter. You're not wrong. She let the silence settle before trying again. So, you live here full-time? No, just when I need to clear my head. Rachel nodded. Must be nice. I've never had a place to clear mine in. He glanced at her but said nothing. She tried again. I don't want to overstay. I'll call a tow truck as soon as I have signal. I was heading to Silver Pine for an interview. It's just a reception job, but I'd finally gotten a call back. He didn't comment, just took a slow sip of his own tea. Rachel hesitated. I had to leave my son with a friend. I'm trying to move closer to town, make things more stable for him. Ethan's eyes flicked up for a brief second, a flash of recognition or maybe memory, before he looked away. Single mom? He asked. She nodded. Yeah, since Leo was 2. He didn't press further, and she didn't offer more. Something in the room tightened, not hostility, but a wall built too long ago to name. Well, he said, setting his mug down, storms like this usually knock out the road for a day or two. You'll need to wait for the plows. Rachel took another sip. She felt small in the chair, smaller in the room, like everything around her had been built for someone else's life. I can keep to myself, she offered. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, he said, but his tone was flat, practiced, the kind of reassurance that left no room for intimacy. She nodded anyway. The clock above the stove ticked quietly. Wind rustled the trees beyond the window wall. Somewhere in the distance, snow slid off the roof in a slow, heavy fall. That night, Rachel sat on one end of the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The fire burned quietly in front of them, and snow fell steadily outside the tall windows. Ethan sat nearby in an armchair, a book open in his hands. They hadn't talked much since the morning. Rachel held a warm mug between her hands. She didn't know what kind of tea it was, but it helped. The silence wasn't cold, just full. Like it was carrying weight neither of them knew how to put into words. Rachel glanced at him and asked, "What are you reading?" Ethan looked up for a moment, then down at the cover. "Something I've already read." Rachel tilted her head. "Why?" Ethan replied. "I already know how it ends." Rachel smiled faintly. "Sounds safe." He gave a small shrug, not looking up again. After a pause, Rachel shifted in her seat and asked, "Do you always stay up here alone?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Rachel continued, "This place, it's beautiful, but it feels like no one really lives in it." Ethan looked up slowly. "Is that your way of asking if I'm lonely?" Rachel met his gaze. "No. That's my way of asking if you're real." The room went still. Ethan closed the book slowly and set it down on the table beside him. "What makes you think you want to know the answer to that?" Rachel answered. "Because I don't trust quiet people. Not the ones who look like they've had everything and built walls around it." Ethan's jaw tensed slightly. He leaned forward just a little. "I haven't had everything," Rachel said. "You have this place, that watch, the way you carry yourself like nothing could touch you." Ethan replied, "Everything I have came after the silence." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And before it?" Ethan didn't answer. The fire popped softly between them. Trying to ease the tension, Rachel looked away and said, "I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be rude. I just don't know what to do with a night like this." Ethan's voice was quiet. "What do you usually do?" Rachel smiled sadly. "Usually I'm cleaning up after my son, making mac and cheese. Trying to fall asleep with the TV on so I don't think too much." Ethan said nothing. Rachel looked at her mug. "Being still like this, it makes the quiet feel loud." A beat passed. Then Rachel reached for the side table to place her mug down and accidentally knocked it. Tea spilled toward the edge. Rachel gasped, "Oh no." Ethan moved fast. They both reached at the same time. Their hands collided over the ceramic. His fingers touched hers, steady, warm. Rachel froze. So did Ethan. Neither moved. For a second, their hands stayed like that. Skin against skin, heat in the contact. Then Ethan pulled away, too fast, grabbing a towel and quickly blotting up the spill. He didn't look at her. Rachel watched him, heart pounding, eyes fixed on his face. Ethan said flatly, "I'll get another towel." He stood and walked toward the kitchen. Rachel stayed frozen on the couch, her hand still halfway to the table. The fire flickered. She whispered to herself, "What was that?" And she had no idea if she meant the tea or the way he touched her like it was the first time he'd let himself feel anything in a long, long time. Rachel couldn't sleep. She wasn't cold. She wasn't uncomfortable. Her body was tired, but her thoughts kept drifting. Back to her car, her son, and the strange calm of this house. She stepped out of the guest room and wandered quietly, barefoot on smooth floors. The hallway was dim, lit only by low lights recessed into the ceiling. She turned a corner and paused. One wall was lined with photos. She hadn't noticed them earlier. Maybe she hadn't been looking closely. Now, in the silence of the night, they drew her in. Most were simple, black and white prints of landscapes and cityscapes, framed in minimalist black. One looked like New York, another the Rockies, beautiful, distant. But one photo stood out. A boy stood beside a man on a worn wooden porch. The boy looked about 10, small for his age, with messy dark hair and a cautious smile. The man beside him had one arm resting over the boy's shoulders. He wore a flannel jacket, boots, and a tired look in his eyes. There was a rusted truck in the background, a bag of dog food on the steps. Rachel leaned closer. The boy was Ethan. She stared for a moment, unsure what moved in her chest, curiosity or something heavier. Then a voice behind her made her jump. Ethan said, "That one doesn't usually get much attention." Rachel turned quickly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to snoop. I was just walking and—" Ethan shook his head. "It's fine." He stepped beside her and looked at the photo. His arms were crossed. His jaw was tight like he hadn't meant to say anything, but now that he had to keep going. Ethan said, "That was my dad." Rachel nodded slowly. "You look just like him." Ethan replied, "So I've been told." Rachel looked at the man in the photo again. "You were close?" Ethan's mouth pulled into a faint, bitter smile. "Not really. He was around just long enough to leave a mark." Rachel stayed quiet, sensing there was more. Ethan said, "That picture was taken a week before he left. No fight, no warning. One day, I came home from school and he was gone. Took the truck, his clothes, everything. Didn't even leave a note." Rachel's heart ached hearing it. She knew the kind of silence that followed someone who vanished like that. The kind that wasn't just quiet, it was loud in all the wrong ways. She asked softly, "Did you ever see him again?" Ethan said, "Not in person. I found him online a few years ago. Turns out he'd moved a few states over, got married again, had another kid, another version of a life." Rachel looked at the boy in the photo. "Did he even try to reach out?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I guess I was the practice round." His voice didn't crack. It was calm, like a wound that had stopped bleeding years ago but never fully healed. Rachel said, "That must have been hard." Ethan shrugged. "At some point you stop hoping people will come back. It's easier to stop needing anything from anyone." Rachel took a breath. She understood that, more than he probably realized. She said gently, "You've built a life where no one can leave you." Ethan looked at her now. Really looked. "That's the goal." Rachel stepped back slightly, her voice softer. "But that's not living, Ethan. That's hiding." He didn't answer. She glanced again at the photo, then back at him. Rachel said, "That silence you live in. It's not peace, is it?" Ethan replied, "It's survival." The next morning the house was brighter, not just from the sun, though it was finally shining, melting the edges of the storm into soft puddles and slushy runoff, but from something quieter, something between them. Rachel stood in the kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in her borrowed sweater. Her hair was still a little damp from the shower. She poured coffee into a white mug, not quite sure if she was allowed to, but doing it anyway. Ethan was at the counter, cracking eggs into a pan. No apron, no comment about her helping herself, just moving with a quiet kind of ease that felt new. She took a sip of coffee, then said, "You know, for a man who lives like a monk, you make a solid breakfast." Ethan didn't look up. "I don't live like a monk," Rachel smirked. "No? You've got the quiet, the isolation, the mysterious past. All you're missing is the shaved head and chanting." Ethan cracked the last egg and turned toward her. "I don't chant," Rachel grinned. "Now I'm disappointed." He turned back to the stove, but she saw it. The tiniest flicker of a smile. It felt like a win. They ate in the sunlit dining room, the long wooden table too big for two people, but for once it didn't feel empty. The food was simple: scrambled eggs, toast, fruit, but warm, real. Rachel didn't say much. Neither did Ethan. But the silence was different now. No tension, no distance, just space. When they finished, Ethan stood and said, "The slopes should be good today." Rachel looked up, confused. "You going skiing?" He nodded. "I usually do the morning after a storm. Fresh powder, fewer people." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "There are people up here besides us," Ethan replied. "Not on this property, but the trailheads start on the other side of the ridge." She blinked. "Wait, you ski on your own land?" "Mostly," Rachel stood. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Ethan looked at her, unreadable. "Do you ski?" She scoffed. "Does falling on my face count?" He tilted his head. "You want to try?" Rachel hesitated. "Are you offering to teach me?" "I'm offering to watch you fall less." She narrowed her eyes playfully. "That was almost charming." Ethan shrugged. "I can dial it back." Rachel laughed. "Don't you dare." They layered up. Ethan handed her extra gear from a closet full of neatly folded jackets and snow pants, everything in her size, probably stocked for guests he never had. She zipped up a waterproof coat, slipped her hands into thick gloves, and followed him out the back door. The snow was deep but packed, shimmering in the sunlight. The air was crisp but not harsh. Pine trees lined the path, their branches heavy with frost. The slope wasn't steep, more like a long, gentle trail curving through the trees. At the edge of the hill, 2 sets of skis were waiting. Ethan knelt to help her with the bindings. His gloves brushed against her ankles as he adjusted the straps. Rachel held still, her heart ticking faster than it should have from something so simple. He stood. Rachel said, "Be honest. How bad is this going to be?" Ethan looked her over. "You'll be sore tomorrow." "Great." He stepped onto his own skis with practiced ease. "Bend your knees, keep your weight forward, don't lock your legs." She wobbled into position. "You're enjoying this already, aren't you?" "I haven't said anything." "You didn't have to." He smirked, then pushed off, gliding down the slope like it was second nature. Rachel followed, shakily, arms flailing for balance. The first 10 feet felt like flying. The next 10 felt like falling. She hit the snow with a soft thud and groaned. "I regret everything." Ethan skidded to a stop a few yards below her and turned around. "You made it farther than I thought." Rachel flopped onto her back, arms splayed. "Your encouragement is overwhelming." He skied back up the slope, unclipped one ski and extended a hand. She took it, and he pulled her up with ease. Their faces were close, breath mingling, eyes locked. Rachel cleared her throat and stepped back. "I'm fine, just bruised, mostly my ego." Ethan said, "That heals slower than anything else." They tried again, and again. For the next hour, Ethan guided her down the slope, giving short, calm directions. Rachel cursed, laughed, fell, and kept trying. She wasn't graceful, but she was determined. Each time she stood, he offered his hand. Each time she laughed, he watched her with something new in his eyes. Not amusement, not patience, warmth. They stopped for a break halfway down the slope. Ethan pulled a thermos from his pack and poured them both coffee. They sat on a flat patch of snow, skis off, backs against a fallen log. Rachel took a sip and looked out over the trees. "This is stupidly beautiful." Ethan nodded. I forget sometimes. She turned to him. You really don't see it anymore? I used to. Now it's just quiet. Rachel said, You say that like it's a bad thing. Ethan looked at her. It can be. She nodded, staring out again. I don't get much quiet. At home it's dishes, bills, reminders, noise. I used to think silence meant something was wrong. Ethan asked, And now? She smiled faintly. Now I think it means something's about to begin. He looked at her, not with curiosity, but with something closer to respect. She asked, You ever teach anyone else to ski? No. Rachel grinned. I'm your first? Ethan replied, Technically. Rachel leaned back and stretched her legs. That explains the lack of sympathy. I thought I was being gentle. You've got the empathy of a traffic cone. Ethan smirked. You're still standing. Barely. They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment, sipping coffee, the world around them hushed in white. Rachel finally said, Thank you. Ethan looked at her. For what? For this. For not asking questions. For letting me fall without making it a thing. He shrugged. Sometimes falling is the only part that feels real. She nodded slowly. They packed up again and started down the rest of the trail. Rachel was steadier now, her movements more confident. She still fell once, a slow, clumsy tumble, but this time she laughed before she even hit the ground. Ethan didn't help her up. He waited, gave her space, watched as she got to her feet, brushed herself off, and skied the last stretch on her own. Back at the house, Rachel peeled off the gear and dropped into the couch with a groan. I think I sprained muscles I didn't know existed. Ethan handed her a glass of water. You'll feel it more tomorrow. I already feel it now. He said nothing, just sat in the chair across from her, the fire crackling softly between them. Rachel looked at him. Do you do this every time it snows? Ethan nodded. It helps me remember I'm not made of glass. Rachel smiled. You feel like steel. Glass would be easier to see through. Ethan looked into the fire. That's the point. They didn't say much after that. But when Rachel stood to head to the guest room for the night, Ethan rose too. Rachel said, Today was good. Ethan replied, You didn't die. Rachel grinned. High bar. He didn't smile, but his eyes did. As she walked down the hallway, she looked back once. He was still standing there, watching the fire, still not ready, still locked up. But she saw it now. His cold demeanor was starting to unfroze. That evening, the sky turned pink behind the mountains. The world outside looked soft, like a postcard, snow dusted in sunlight, trees stretching up through mist, the wind finally quiet for the first time in days. Inside, Rachel stood at the counter, texting with one hand, a warm mug of tea in the other. Ethan watched her from a short distance, pretending not to. She finished her message and exhaled. Interview got pushed. The woman coordinating it was snowed in too. She smiled faintly. So I didn't miss anything after all. Ethan nodded. That's lucky. Rachel added, Leo's still with my sister. She said he's fine. Ate too many snacks and fell asleep watching cartoons. Living the dream. Glad to hear it, Ethan said, trying not to let the concern show in his voice. But something wasn't right. She was pale beneath her cheeks. Her hand shook slightly as she lifted the mug. She set it down without drinking. You okay? He asked. Rachel gave a tired smile. Just tired. I think skiing broke me. You were fine earlier. She rubbed her forehead. Guess it caught up. Ethan stepped a little closer. Sit. You don't look great. Rachel rolled her eyes, half amused. Thanks. He didn't laugh. That's when she blinked slowly, staggered half a step, and caught herself on the edge of the counter. Ethan crossed the room in seconds. Rachel. She waved him off, but her movements were sluggish now, uncoordinated. I just need to lie down. Her voice was weaker, quieter. The color in her face had gone from pink to chalk. Ethan guided her gently toward the couch. She resisted at first. Pride. Stubbornness. But her legs gave out halfway there, and she sank down hard. He knelt in front of her. "You're burning up." Rachel leaned her head back and whispered, "It's fine. I just need to rest." Ethan didn't argue. He stood and disappeared down the hallway. In the kitchen, his hands moved faster than they had in years, boiling water, pulling herbs from a jar, wetting a cloth. Everything inside him was tense, alert, as if the cold from outside had found a way into the house and settled in his chest. When he returned, Rachel was curled on her side, one arm under her head. Her skin glistened. Her breathing was shallow. The blanket had slipped off. He knelt beside her again. "Sit up," Ethan said gently. "You need to drink this." She barely opened her eyes. "What is it?" "Elderberry, honey, it'll help." Rachel pushed herself upright, barely. Ethan slipped an arm behind her shoulders and steadied her as she drank. Her hands trembled so badly he had to hold the cup. When she finished, she sagged against the pillows, eyelids fluttering. Ethan set the mug down and pressed the damp cloth to her forehead. She flinched, then relaxed. Her voice was almost inaudible. "You don't have to do all this." "I know." Rachel opened her eyes just a little. "You always take care of strangers who show up in snowstorms?" Ethan looked down at her. "Just the ones who pretend they're fine when they're not." A weak smile touched her lips. "Then I guess I'm your favorite. You're definitely the loudest." She laughed softly, more air than sound, and then her head tipped sideways. Sleep took her almost instantly. Ethan stayed beside her. He didn't know why. He could have gotten up, gone back to his room, let the tea and cloth do their work. But he didn't. The hours passed slowly. At some point, he moved her to the guest bed. She woke only slightly, mumbling something about not being able to feel her feet. He rubbed them gently through the blanket, trying not to imagine what would have happened if she hadn't made it to the house. Afterward, he brought the chair from his study and set it beside the bed. It was almost midnight when she stirred again. Her voice was hoarse. "Ethan?" He straightened. "I'm here." Her eyes barely opened. "How long was I asleep?" "A few hours." She took a shallow breath. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause drama." "You didn't." She winced. "I really thought I was just sore from skiing." Ethan replied, "Skiing doesn't cause fevers." Rachel let her eyes close again. "Guess I'm not as tough as I pretend." Ethan sat back in the chair. "You're tougher." She didn't respond, but a faint line between her brows softened. After a while, she spoke again. "When Leo was little, he used to get sick all the time. Asthma, infections. We didn't have heat for a few winters. I used to hold him against my chest and just pray my body was warm enough." Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. Rachel added, "No one ever took care of me, not really, so I stopped expecting it." Ethan's jaw tightened. Rachel turned her head slightly on the pillow. "Why are you still here?" Ethan said, "Because I don't want to leave." Rachel opened her eyes. Her voice was rough but steady. "That's new for you, isn't it?" He nodded. "Yeah." They looked at each other in the dim room, something heavy and quiet passing between them. Not romantic, not yet, but real. Rachel whispered, "Thank you." Ethan stood. "Get some sleep." He stepped out into the hallway and leaned against the wall, running a hand over his face. It wasn't just that she'd gotten sick. It was that he'd cared. He didn't know what to do with that. An hour passed, then another. At some point, he dozed off in the chair beside her bed. When he opened his eyes again, the firelight had dimmed, and Rachel was still sleeping. But her hand had slipped out from under the blanket, and it was resting just a few inches from his. The fire had burned low in the living room, but Ethan hadn't noticed. He sat in the chair beside Rachel's bed, elbows on his knees, watching her breathe. Her fever had eased, but her body was still recovering. Pale cheeks, soft exhales, fingers twitching faintly against the blanket. She hadn't woken in hours. Ethan leaned back in the chair. He should have gone to bed, but instead, he stayed. He didn't recognize himself anymore. He didn't stay for people. He didn't wait beside beds. He didn't feel the need to protect anyone, not since he'd learned that protecting people only worked if they didn't leave. Rachel stirred. then opened her eyes slowly. Her voice was low and dry. "You're still here?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah." She blinked a few times, then offered a soft smile. "Well, that's unexpected." He gave a faint shrug. "You had a fever." Rachel shifted against the pillow. "And you decided to sit here like some grumpy mountain nurse?" "Something like that." She studied him for a moment. "You don't strike me as someone who sticks around." "I'm not." "So why are you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air. Then he said, "I don't know." Rachel watched him carefully but didn't push. He exhaled, then looked away. "There's something about you that makes it hard to stay quiet." Rachel smiled gently. "So stop being quiet." The room went still again, not from discomfort, but from the weight of something unspoken finally asking to be let out. Ethan's voice dropped. "I wasn't always like this. The silence, the distance. I didn't come from wealth, not at first. My mom worked nights, cleaning offices, waiting tables. Some weeks we didn't know if the power would stay on." Rachel listened, unmoving. "My dad left when I was 10, he continued, "but he was never really there anyway. He'd go weeks without speaking to us, even when he was home. He liked the idea of being a father more than the job itself." Ethan looked at the ceiling for a beat. "I remember once I brought home a report card, straight A's. He looked at it, said, 'Could have been better,' and walked out. That was the last time I tried to impress him." Rachel whispered, "He really said that?" "He didn't say much else after." He paused as if remembering more than he could explain. "I started working when I was 15, groceries, then fixing up engines. Didn't care what it was. I just needed out. I applied to every scholarship I could find, took on debt I didn't understand, got into college, never looked back." Rachel said, "That's incredible." Ethan shook his head. "It was survival, not heroism." There was silence. Then he added, quieter now, "I built everything after that from the ground up. First job out of school, slept in a friend's storage room, sold my first startup when I was 27. Everyone thought it was luck. They didn't see the 20-hour days, the panic, the loneliness, the way success starts to feel like a shield you can't put down." Rachel's expression softened. "And the people around you?" "They saw the money, the name. They didn't see me." A long pause. Rachel asked, "Did you ever let anyone see you?" Ethan looked at her then, a long, tired look that said more than words. "No," he said. "Not really." Rachel didn't reply. She didn't need to. Ethan ran a hand over his face. "You know what the worst part is? I started believing that the only way to stay safe was to stay alone, that needing anyone made you weak, that if no one could leave, I couldn't lose anything." Rachel whispered, "That sounds exhausting." "It was, still is." He looked away, his voice lower now. "And then you showed up, standing in the snow, knocking like the world hadn't already taken enough from you." Rachel blinked, stunned by the honesty in his voice. "You came in and didn't ask for anything. You were cold, tired, but you didn't break. You sat in that chair like you didn't care what this place looked like, just that it had warmth." He leaned back, eyes still on her. "And somewhere in that, I started hearing the quiet differently." Rachel's voice was soft. "How?" "It stopped sounding like protection." She didn't speak. Ethan finally said, "It started sounding like a cage." Rachel laid back slowly against the pillows. She looked at him, steady and unafraid. She said, "You're allowed to want more than silence, Ethan." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Rachel smiled faintly. "You're not as unreadable as you think you are." Ethan raised an eyebrow. No, you talk a lot with your eyes," said Rachel. "I'll take that as a compliment," he replies. "It is," she says. They sat in silence for a while, but this time there was nothing unfinished about it. It felt full, understood. Eventually, Ethan stood to leave. Rachel whispered, "Thank you for telling me." He paused at the door. "I haven't told anyone in a long time," he said. Rachel replied, "I know." The morning sun poured in through the tall windows, casting soft light across the wooden floors and stone walls. The storm had finally passed. The world outside looked clean, untouched, a perfect frozen silence stretching out over the hills. Rachel sat in the living room, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her body still recovering. A hot mug rested in her hands. She hadn't said much since waking up, but the worst of the fever had passed. She looked pale, a little hollowed out, but her eyes were clear again. Ethan moved quietly in the kitchen, not hovering, not fussing, just nearby. Every so often their eyes met, and each time they did, something lingered. It wasn't awkwardness, it wasn't comfort either, it was something in between, like a word hanging in the air, unspoken but heavy. Rachel spoke first. "I feel like I got hit by a truck." Ethan poured her more tea. "You look better." "That's not a high bar." "You're upright. That's progress." She smiled a little, then looked down into her mug. "Thank you. For everything." "You already said that." "Well, I meant it, so I'm saying it again." Ethan crossed his arms and leaned against the counter. "You were sick. I had towels. It's not a dramatic origin story." Rachel looked at him. "You stayed." He didn't reply. She added, "That means something." Still, Ethan said nothing. Rachel shifted on the couch. "You know, I don't usually get nervous around people. I've been through enough to figure out how to hold my ground. But you—" He raised an eyebrow. "What about me?" She hesitated. "You make the air feel heavier." Ethan tilted his head. "That's not exactly flattering." "It wasn't meant to be." He let that land. Rachel looked toward the window. "I used to think connection was about comfort, about the easy stuff, laughing at the same movies, making the same kind of coffee. But I'm starting to think it's not." Ethan stayed quiet. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like waiting. Rachel turned back to him. He was already looking her in the eyes. No tension, no games, just something fragile between them, unspoken but suddenly very loud. Neither moved at first. Then, without a word, Ethan crossed the space between them. He came closer, and she let him. And then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, careful, real, like two people who knew what it meant to be alone for too long and were just starting to believe they didn't have to be anymore. When they pulled apart, their foreheads stayed close. The cabin was still warm with the scent of coffee when Ethan noticed the silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind he'd carefully constructed in this house. This silence felt wrong, off balance. Then it hit him. She wasn't here. No sound of her slippers against the floor. No soft clearing of her throat. No teasing comment about his dry toast or his poor choice in coffee mugs. Just silence. He glanced at the guest hallway, waiting for her to appear. She didn't. He gave it a few more minutes, took a sip, checked his phone, watched the snow on the deck outside start to melt in the sun. Still nothing. Eventually, he walked toward her room. The door was open. The bed was made. The sweatshirt she'd worn was folded neatly on the chair. The thick wool socks she'd borrowed lay on top. The tea mug he'd brought her the night before sat clean and dry on the nightstand. Ethan stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds before the truth landed. She'd left. No note, no goodbye, nothing. A pulse thudded once in his jaw. Low, sharp, immediate. He turned away from the room and walked back down the hall, as if distance could explain it. As if leaving her door behind might give him something else to hold on to, but there was no other reason. She was gone. And she hadn't told him why. He walked to the window overlooking the driveway. The snow was half melted now, but there were fresh tire tracks in the powder. They cut through the packed layer beneath and disappeared around the bend in the road. Gone. Like she was never there. He stared at those tracks for a long time. He told himself maybe she'd just stepped out. Maybe she'd be back. Maybe... No. She had left. He let out a dry breath and pressed both hands against the edge of the sink. For a moment he said nothing, thought nothing, felt nothing. And then the silence broke inside him. He slammed the cabinet door shut without realizing it. The sound cracked through the house, sharp and hollow. He turned, paced once, then again. What had he been thinking? What had he let happen? She was never supposed to stay, he knew that. He'd known that from the moment she knocked on his door. And yet, he had let her in anyway. He'd brought her tea, sat by her bedside, kissed her like it meant something, and she'd walked out without a word. Ethan gripped the edge of the countertop so tightly his knuckles turned white. He should have known better. He did know better. This was what happened when you let people in. This was why he didn't, why he'd built this fortress of wood and glass and distance. Why he'd learned to live in the silence. It protected him. And for a moment, just a moment, he'd believed she was different. But she left, like his father, like every deal that turned cold the second the ink dried. Like the woman who once told him she loved him, then disappeared when his company lost a quarter's worth of market value. He should have known. He laughed once, dry and bitter, the sound scraping the back of his throat. Ethan walked into the living room and sank into the couch. The cushion where she'd curled up just days ago still held the faint impression of her weight. The blanket she'd pulled around herself was still tossed over the side. It made him feel sick. He stood up again and tossed the blanket toward the chair. It missed and hit the floor. He didn't care. He grabbed his coat, went outside. The cold slapped him hard, but he didn't stop. He walked to the edge of the tree line where her car had once been buried under snow, where she'd once stood, shivering and nervous, asking for help. Now it was empty, just ground, just wind, just space. He stared at it. For the first time in years, he felt stupid, not because she had fooled him, but because he had fooled himself. He had believed even for a second that this was more than a coincidence, that maybe something real had found him after years of turning people away. And now it felt like weakness, like proof that all his instincts, all his walls, had been right all along. He walked back into the house and slammed the door behind him. Let it echo, let it rattle the quiet. He stood in the foyer, breathing hard, and he made a promise to himself. One he had made before, but never with this much heat. Never again would he let someone in. The next day, Ethan was on the back deck splitting firewood when he heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel. At first he thought it was nothing, just the echo of memory playing games with him again. But then he straightened, axe in hand, and looked toward the edge of the trees. A red car rounded the bend in the driveway. It was hers. He froze. She parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment before the door finally creaked open. Rachel stepped out slowly, one hand gripping the top of the car door. Her hair was pulled back, eyes shadowed from a night without sleep. Her coat looked too thin for the wind. She looked exhausted, but she was here. Rachel took one cautious step forward. "I wasn't sure you'd be here." Ethan didn't move. He stood by the chopping block, breathing hard from the cold and from something else he couldn't name. Rachel said, her voice quiet, "Can I talk to you?" Ethan didn't speak at first. Then he nodded once and set the axe down beside the stack of logs. "I'm listening." Rachel wrapped her arms around herself. "I didn't want to leave like that." Ethan looked at her, steady. "But you did." Rachel nodded. "Yeah, I did. I'm not proud of it." He stayed quiet, arms crossed. Rachel took another step forward, her boots crunching softly in the snow. "I got a call from my sister that morning. 4 missed calls, actually. My son had an allergic reaction. Vomiting." Ethan's expression shifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Rachel said, "She rushed him to urgent care. He's okay now, but when I saw those messages I didn't think. I just ran, got in the car and left." Ethan's voice was low. "You didn't leave a note." Rachel said, "I know. I was scared. I didn't stop to think about anything else. I didn't even put real shoes on." Ethan looked away for a beat. Then he said, "Is he okay now?" Rachel nodded. "Yeah, he's fine. Watching cartoons and recovering." Ethan let out a breath. "Good, I'm glad." There was a pause, not hostile, just uncertain. Rachel said, "I came back because I didn't want you to think I disappeared, or that it didn't matter." Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay." Rachel continued, voice quiet. I don't know what last night meant to you, but it meant something to me. But my son, he's my whole life. Ethan said softly, I know. Rachel blinked. You do? Ethan nodded. Yeah, I figured it had to be something important. You're not the kind of person who runs. Rachel swallowed. No, I'm not. I was hurt, Ethan said honestly. Still am a little. But I wasn't angry at you. I didn't know what had happened, and my mind went to old places. Rachel stepped closer. I get that. Ethan looked at her, his voice more measured now. I've been left before, by people who didn't come back. I guess I was afraid you were one of them. Rachel said, I'm not. That's why I'm here. He nodded again. Rachel added, I didn't come to fix everything. I just needed to say thank you for what you did, for how you treated me. I don't forget that. Ethan's voice was steady. You don't need to thank me. I do, Rachel said. Because you didn't have to stay up with me, or help me, or kiss me, but you did, and I left anyway. That sucks. Ethan gave a faint, dry smile. Yeah, it does. Rachel looked down, embarrassed. I'm still trying to figure out if this thing, whatever it is, makes sense for someone like me, for someone with a kid and a messy life. Ethan said gently, It doesn't have to make sense right now. She looked up, surprised. Ethan continued, You left because you had to. That's what good parents do. You showed me who you are, and maybe that's the most honest thing you could have done. Rachel's throat tightened. You don't hate me? Ethan stepped forward slowly. No, I don't. She let out a soft breath. He said, I missed you. But I understand, and I'm glad Leo's okay. Rachel smiled weakly. Me too. There was a pause. Rachel asked, So, where does that leave us? Ethan shrugged slightly. Right here, on a snowy driveway, trying to figure it out. She let out a breath of nervous laughter. That sounds about right. They stood there, neither moving, both shivering now in the morning chill. Rachel said, I should go back. My sister's got a dentist appointment, and I promised her I'd take over for a few hours. Ethan nodded. Of course. But I don't want this to be goodbye. It doesn't have to be. Rachel tilted her head. Are you sure? Ethan looked at her. I've never been more. The next week, Ethan drove to meet Rachel. She was standing in front of a narrow brick cafe, waving him over with a smile that belonged in a warmer month. You found it, Rachel said, walking toward him. Ethan nodded, hands in his pockets. Eventually, you're not great with directions. I said next to the tire shop with the flamingo sign. That's extremely clear. He raised an eyebrow. There are 3 tire shops on this block. Rachel smirked. Only one has a flamingo. She reached for his hand, casually, as if they'd done it 100 times. And to Ethan's surprise, he let her. The cafe was small and simple. It smelled like coffee and cinnamon and old wood. Every table was full, but somehow a tiny booth in the back opened just as they stepped inside. They slid in across from each other. Rachel leaned forward, elbows on the table. You okay? Ethan nodded, glancing around. It's different. She smiled. That's the point. A waiter came by and dropped 2 glasses of water without a word. Rachel ordered immediately, a breakfast sandwich with extra avocado and a side of sweet potato fries. Ethan stared at the menu like it was written in another language. Rachel looked up at him, teasing. Don't tell me you've never had brunch in a place where the tables wobble. Ethan said, Not unless it came with a tax write-off. Rachel grinned. Try the shakshuka. It'll change your life. He nodded, closing the menu. I'll trust you. Wow, that's big for you. You have no idea. The food arrived quickly, hot, messy, flavorful. Rachel took big bites, unapologetically messy. Ethan ate more carefully, but found himself smiling at how little she seemed to care about appearances here. It was loud. It was chaotic. It was alive. And so was she. She told him stories while they ate, about her old apartment, about her neighbor who blasted salsa music every Sunday, about Leo's first-grade teacher who wore glittery eyeshadow and tried to convince the kids she was secretly a wizard. Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in years. Rachel dipped a fry in her coffee just to prove it was better that way. Ethan cringed. She made him try it. He hated it. She laughed so hard she almost fell off the bench. When the check came, she grabbed it. Ethan said, "I've got it." Rachel shook her head. "Not today." "You're really going to make a millionaire let you pay?" "I'm going to make a man who just discovered brunch let me treat him to something new." He raised a brow. "So this is revenge?" They left, and Ethan followed her across the street into a small community garden tucked behind an apartment building. It was nothing like the landscapes of his property, just a few rows of raised beds, a couple benches, some late-winter herbs struggling under frost. She sat on a bench, patting the space beside her. "I come here sometimes when things get too loud. Leo likes to pretend the mint plants are money." Ethan sat. "What do you pretend they are?" "Hope." He looked at her. "That's cheesy," she smiled. "You like that about me." He didn't deny it. Ethan hadn't expected to feel this grounded here, in the middle of her world, surrounded by noise and mess and heart. But he did. And as they sat on that old bench, her fingers laced with his, he realized something terrifying. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to go back to the silence, because somewhere along the date he'd stopped thinking about how different they were and started thinking about how much better life felt with her in it. A few days later, Rachel and Ethan sat by the fireplace of Ethan's mansion. They had spent the day together, hiking a little, cooking dinner side by side, laughing about nothing. It was the kind of day that made time feel different, slower, safer. Ethan had never invited anyone back here twice, and now she was here again, like she belonged. Rachel smiled faintly as she looked around. "You really don't change anything, do you?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "This house, every detail looks exactly like the last time I was here." Ethan said, "Why would I change it?" Rachel looked down into her cup. "People usually shift things around when they're nervous." Ethan leaned in slightly. "I'm not nervous." She smirked. "That makes one of us." He studied her for a moment. "Why are you nervous?" Rachel hesitated. "Because it's quiet again, and the quiet feels like it's about to say something." Ethan didn't smile this time. Instead, he reached out and took the cup from her hands, setting it on the table. Then he turned back to her, eyes steady. "Rachel, I think we should talk." She froze. Not visibly, but enough that he felt the air shift. He continued gently, "I've been thinking a lot about you, about us, about what this is." Rachel stayed still. Ethan went on. "I know things started in a strange way, and I know we come from completely different places, but every time I see you, I want more time. Every time I leave, I want to come back." Her breathing was quiet. "I've lived alone for a long time," Ethan said, "and it worked, until you showed up. Now, it doesn't feel enough anymore, not without you." Rachel blinked. Ethan added, "I'm not saying let's change everything right now, but I'm asking if we can think about it, maybe start making plans, together." A long, aching silence. Rachel looked at him, and something in her face cracked. "I can't," she said softly. Ethan froze. "You can't?" She pulled the blanket tighter around her like armor. "I shouldn't even be here." He sat up straighter. "Rachel, no, let me say this," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't have let this go this far. I shouldn't have let you kiss me, or call me, or meet me for brunch like we were normal people figuring out if we work." "Why not?" "Because I don't have room for this," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "Not now, not with everything on my plate." Ethan softened his tone. "I'm not asking you to move in tomorrow." "You don't get it," she said, standing suddenly, pacing across the living room. "I already have a person who needs me every day, who depends on me for everything, and I've spent years keeping things stable for him. I know that." "No, you don't," Rachel snapped, then immediately softened. "You don't. You've built this world around stillness and calm, and I love that about you. But my world? It's chaos. It's bills and babysitters and forgotten parent-teacher meetings. It's trying to explain why Dad's not around without crying in front of him." She turned away, wiping her eyes quickly. Ethan rose slowly. "I'm not trying to replace anything, or anyone." Rachel looked back at him. "But you would. Even if you didn't mean to, you'd become part of his life. And then if something went wrong, if I got too scared, or you got tired of this mess, I'd have to watch him lose another man he trusted." Ethan's voice was low. "You think I'd leave him?" "I don't think I can take the chance," she said, voice cracked, eyes wet. "Because if he lost you, it wouldn't just break him. It would break me." Ethan stepped closer. "I would never hurt you." Rachel shook her head, backing away. "You don't get to say that." "Why not?" "Because everyone says that." Her hands were shaking now, and she tried to tuck them under her arms. "I'm not ready for this. I thought maybe I was, but it's too much, it's too soon." Ethan swallowed hard. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I can't do this right now." "Are you leaving?" Rachel hesitated. "I think I should." Ethan looked down, jaw tight. "I don't understand." Rachel took a shaky breath. "I know." She picked up her coat from the hook near the door. Her keys were already in her pocket. She opened the door but paused on the threshold. "I wasn't lying," she said, "about any of it." Ethan looked at her, silent. Rachel whispered, "I'm sorry." She stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind her. Ethan stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the quiet he'd once craved. It had never felt so loud. The house was quiet again, a heavy quiet, like something had been removed, not just from the room but from the space inside his chest. Rachel was gone. Again. He walked through the living room slowly, his eyes scanning the little signs of her, but she was gone, and she might not come back. He dropped onto the couch and leaned forward. Her words echoed in his mind. At the time, it had felt like rejection. He stared into the fire for a long time, watching the flames dance, listening to the soft crackle of burning wood. And then suddenly, the knot inside him began to loosen. She wasn't running from him. She was protecting her son. She was doing exactly what she was supposed to do. Exactly what any good mother would do. She didn't leave because she was rejecting Ethan. She left because she knew what it meant, what it could cost, and she couldn't afford to gamble with her child's stability. Ethan leaned back and exhaled slowly, and for the first time, he didn't feel hurt. He felt proud, because that was exactly the kind of woman he wanted in his life. Someone who would fight for the people she loved, even if it meant walking away from something that mattered to her. He closed his eyes. When his father left, it had hollowed something out in him, and he'd spent years trying to fill it with success, with structure, with solitude. But all of that had been armor. Rachel didn't wear armor. She carried everything, fear, hope, love, right at the surface. And still, she showed up. Still, she loved. He stood abruptly, grabbed his coat. Keys, boots. He didn't have a plan. He just knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her walk away thinking she was alone in this. Not anymore. The drive into the city felt longer than usual, even though the roads were clear now. Each mile marker felt like a heartbeat, a question, a hope. He replayed everything. Their first meeting, the blizzard, the quiet nights, the ski lesson, the way she'd laughed at brunch, the way she'd looked at him when he said he wanted more. And now, maybe she needed someone to show her that she didn't have to do it all alone anymore. He pulled into her street just as the sun dipped behind the buildings. It was a modest neighborhood. He found her apartment number and parked across the street. He climbed the stairs and knocked. It took a minute. Then the door opened. Rachel stood there, a towel in her hand, her hair slightly damp, eyes wide with surprise. "Ethan?" He nodded, suddenly unsure of what to say. She blinked. "Is everything okay?" He exhaled. "I don't know, but I needed to talk to you." Rachel swallowed. "Okay. I just came here because, after you left, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About Leo. About not wanting to fall if it meant hurting him." She looked down. Ethan continued, voice steady. And I get it. I really do. I grew up with the sound of a door slamming behind someone who never came back. And for a long time I told myself that if I never let anyone in, I'd never feel that again. Rachel looked up, slowly. But then I met you, Ethan said, and suddenly silence felt like a punishment, like something was missing. He stepped closer. You didn't leave because you were afraid. You left because you're strong, because you knew that your son comes first, and that's exactly why I want to be in your life, because I know what that kind of love looks like. I've lived without it, and I don't want to anymore. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to be a chapter you skip to protect yourself. I want to be the one you can count on, the one who stays. Tears brimmed in her eyes. Ethan said gently, I'm not asking for everything. I'm just asking for a chance to build something real, with you, with Leo, on your terms. Rachel stepped out into the hallway and wrapped her arms around herself. She whispered, You really mean that? Ethan nodded. Every word. She blinked, and a tear slipped down her cheek. No one's ever said anything like that to me, not without wanting something. I don't want anything, Ethan said, except the chance to love the life you already have. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. Ethan reached out, took her hand gently. I don't care how messy it gets. I don't care how slow it has to go. I'm here. If you'll have me. Rachel let out a shaky breath. And then she stepped into him. She rested her forehead against his chest, her arms slowly wrapping around his waist. Ethan held her. For a long moment they didn't speak. Then Rachel murmured, I was so scared. I know, Ethan whispered. Me too. She leaned back just enough to look up at him. I want this, she said. I'm just still figuring out how. Ethan nodded. We'll figure it out together. A small laugh escaped her, wet with tears. Leo's going to ask if you brought snacks, Ethan smiled. Good, because I did. They stood there, wrapped in each other, in the golden light of the hallway, and this time, neither of them let go. If this story touched you, we'd love to know. If you were Rachel, would you give Ethan a chance? Tell us in the comments. Your story matters here. Also, rate the story from 1 to 10 below, so we can always get better. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We share the kind of moments that remind us of the beauty in life.